There we go. Alrighty. So introduced, ready to rock. Here we go. So quick introduction sort of about the PLOS editorial boards, what they are. Things we tend to really sort of try to pay attention to when we build our editorial boards are stuff like broad coverage in geography, of course, in subject areas expertise that the journals are trying to represent, and as well as career stage. So we really do try to create boards that are, representative and diverse across gender axes, geographical axes, career age, career progression axes, all those sort of things. And from my perspective as a journal handler, your ability to help us connect with those new people, get new people in is always really, and feedback on that is always really helpful as well. So a quick look at sort of what the editorial board pages look like, and there's sort of always a nice resource just to see who is doing work kind of adjacent to you in your region, in your research areas, and to call out that these classifications that you see here are the same ones that you have sort of fed into Editorial Manager when you go and update your information, which we'll touch on in a second. But just to say that it's really important that to make these sort of classifications as rich and as descriptive as possible. And so we have basically three editorial roles: editor-in-chief, section editors, and academic editors. Section editors work at quite a broad level. Sitting, so at least in Comp Bio, one of my journals, for example, we have a section that's neuroscience, which is incredibly broad. So they tend to work at sort of much more broader level. And academic editors we see as sort of subject matter experts able to deal with very specific issues, questions, research ideas, that kind of stuff. The section editors see papers first, and we'll go through sort of the life cycle of a paper. And once the paper has been invited to an academic editor is receiving a paper, a section editor has already taken some form of look at it, but we'll kind of get into that shortly. So the role of the academic editor, hopefully you're somewhat familiar with it already, but we expect that academic editors oversee the peer review process basically from beginning to end. They are responsible for conducting an initial expert assessment based on our publication criteria, so ethical soundness, rigor, selectivity, that kind of stuff. The CJs, the community journals, which you guys all represent and lend your time to, are all considered selective journals. You're responsible for finding and inviting reviewers and making sure that the reviewer feedback is helpful, clearly written, and appropriate. It's not saying things like "this paper sucks, I hate it," and not to trivialize sort of the challenges in finding reviewers. Just recognizing that the sort of publishing landscape has changed a lot in the last few years, and that this is only getting harder. So not to trivialize that as a task, but it is a very the fundamental role of the academic editor to make sure that the feedback that is being given is helpful and constructive. And another really important thing as well is also making sure that in these decisions that, like I said, the section editors are broad, sort of typically working at a broad topical level, excuse me, that any decision that you are suggesting, so one reviewer says minor revisions, one reviewer says major revisions, adjudicating that decision to say, I believe it should be minor revisions because of comments 1, 3, and 8. It's always really important that the academic editor adds their feedback to, even if both the reviewers say accept, the academic editor adding a quick comment saying, I agree with these decisions is really helpful to help contextualize the section editor's work. And there's also an element of sort of helping us stay engaged as representatives of PLOS and our journal community. So as you go around and give talks and meet all the wonderful people in your research communities, we always appreciate advocacy, just saying, it's an organization that I think does good stuff. And I think the journal publishes interesting work. Learn about us. We also have a guide that sort of overlines all these responsibilities, roles, that kind of stuff. And a lot of this presentation, you will notice, is me clicking into stuff to sort of demonstrate that it exists and where to find it versus going into the nuts and bolts of the specific thing. But so yeah, talking about the ambassadorship there, expectations for the handling of papers and so on. There's also, we expect all board members at all levels to adhere to our code of conduct. Hopefully this is all fairly straightforward and clear and acceptable to you guys, but we do take publication ethics and, making sure that people who interact with PLOS are being treated with respect. We take it very seriously. And we do intervene when needed to make sure that people are upholding this code of conduct for us. All right. And so moving into sort of more of the technical side of things, as we started getting into our best friend, Editorial Manager. We use Editorial Manager. You guys are probably familiar with it from other journals as well. It's owned by a company called Ares Systems, who are owned by Elsevier, which I think is always an important thing to know, that Elsevier owns this system. But the first thing to do is when you're starting out is to make sure that your information is all up to date, the classifications that referred to in the previous slides, making sure that those are as descriptive as possible and making sure they're up to date. When you log into the Editorial Manager portal, there'll be a button that says update my information on the top right. There's also personal keywords, which you can add. These are free text keywords, separate from the journal taxonomies, the journal tag classifications. And these are helpful for adding sort of richer definitions, scopes of your work. So some of the journal taxonomies might not be granular enough given the breadth of the journal. So filling out some personal keywords of what your specific interests are can be helpful in making sure that you're receiving invitations for papers that are good fits for you. And that's so you can do sort of help to indicate your area of experience. Another sort of important basic function of Editorial Manager and your time is making sure that when you're unavailable, you have these dates set in Editorial Manager. And again, this guide is just, will give you a quick run through on how to update your personal information, how to set out of offices, and all that good stuff. If you ever have any questions about Editorial Manager, every journal has a dedicated journal office. The email is typically PLOS Compbiology or compbiology@plos.org, digitalhealth@plos.org. You should be familiar with those emails, but as always, they're fairly easy to find. And those folks are always happy to help with technical questions. So once we have gotten our Editorial Manager profile set up, classified, well-defined, all that good stuff, this is when we start getting into the actual peer review. And this is an outline of what the peer review process looks like at PLOS. The steps colored in blue represent work handling moments of the section editor, and the steps in green represent the responsibility steps of the academic editors. So a paper comes in, it's assigned to a section editor. That's sort of the key difference between section editors and academic editors. Section editors just receive assignments. The papers, when they come to them, will have been checked for basically like IRB approval, data availability statements, compliance with sort of PLOS policies, and those sort of things. They will do an initial evaluation of the manuscript and figuring out basically, is this written up to a standard that an editor will want to take this on? The language is clear enough and clean enough that I'll want to take this on. It's within scope of the journal. In our case, because these are selective journals, do I think this paper is novel and exciting, and we'll get typically citations we see as that measure. And so then at this stage of the menu, they can either reject without review, or they can invite an academic editor, which is where you guys will start seeing the process. One thing that is really, really important to note that we are really trying to get everyone to sort of work together on is because academic editors are considered the subject matter experts and the section editors work at a pretty broad level, there's a very good chance that a section editor will not be super familiar with the paper and that you are very, very familiar with the research of that paper. So when they send you an invitation, it's possible that they're kind of asking for a second, first opinion. And so if you receive a paper that's definitely in your wheelhouse and your reaction to it is, "Oh, I really just don't think this is very good," please accept that assignment and issue a reject decision versus rejecting the assignment, because the section editor will then just ask another person versus sort of getting a quick decision out to the authors early. So if you see a paper that you think shouldn't be sent to review, just because the section editor has sent it to you does not mean that it has to go out for review. So you are very much empowered to sort of issue a academic editor desk reject in that way. But if all looks good and you think the paper is within, a good fit for the journal and has a good chance of being published and peer reviewers will be interested in it, sort of passing your initial evaluation there, we will start inviting reviewers. If you've rejected, there's a step there. We think that we can send this to review. We'll start inviting reviewers. We typically have the systems configured for 2 or 3 reviewers before the system will move forward with the decision. Or you'll be prompted to make a decision. And then it is on the academic editor here to take the step of writing up the decision letter, synthesizing the comments, and making that recommendation to the section editor. Then when the section editor receives the paper, they basically typically rubber stamp the decision, saying things like, we fully, all the authors all the reviewers are in agreement. The section editor doesn't really have much outside of making sure that the reviews are written in a nice way that, again, is in line with our code of conduct. Reasons that they might not, just as things to sort of look forward to, is, for example, if all the peer reviewers, they're typically checking for things like, are the peer reviewers from the same institution, for example? Is there a conflict of interest that has gone unnoticed in this process that they have to flag? So typically that's kind of what they're checking for at this stage to make sure that everything is being handled ethically versus sort of, is this editorially interesting? The section editor then confirms the decision, sends it to the authors, and they make their revisions as needed. The other thing to sort of call out about this kind of process in general is that, as PLOS, the thing that we're really optimizing for is ethical sound handling. You might notice there's a lot of sort of handoffs in this process. We do not optimize for speed. Speed often tends to create problems, ethical challenges. So the thing that we're optimizing for, we're trying to build for in our peer review process is making sure that it's all done above board as much as possible. So yeah, quick review of the editorial process. So now that we know what's going to happen in the general flow of things, you're going to start receiving invitations to handle manuscripts because your classifications are all up to date, your personal keywords are all nice and rich, and now you're receiving invitations. These invitations will come through email. It'll typically say, PLOS Computational Biology has sent you an invitation to handle a manuscript. And invitations are sent by section editors, but they are sent through editorial managers, so you'll see them coming from the journal office. And the section editors try to determine who would be a good fit for a paper based on the number of classification matches that any given paper has in the system. Also bearing in mind things like, does this editor already have a bunch of papers or invitations assigned with them? Okay, maybe we'll move to someone who's less busy. And trying to sort of balance those needs as the board needs them to. And so this is a quick look at what kind of one of those invitations looks like. Again, not going to go through all of this, but there's a lot of information. These are quite dense emails for sure, recognizing that. But there should be a lot of information here, or enough information here to sort of at least have a sense of the paper that you're accepting, declining. Should have the abstract in it, relevant keywords, that kind of stuff. So you should have a decent sense of whether or not you think the paper is a good fit from this email. Like I said, you always have the option to accept or reject papers, kind of as you think both fit and your schedule allows. And we have sort of a decision matrix that helps you figure out, that we'll go into later, whether or not you think this paper is a good fit for you. But typically, most people I find have a good sort of gut intuition of whether or not this is a good fit for them. And another thing to sort of call out here about that sort of intuition is you're not expected, you're encouraged to accept assignments from work that might not be exactly within your realm, but somewhat work that's close enough that, I still know who the correct reviewers are, and I'm confident in understanding the language that those reviewers would sort of bring my way in terms of how to suggest reviews for this paper or revisions for this paper. So there are expectations, of course, with that. We typically expect that when you are available, you'll handle 1 to 3 manuscripts per month. We aim sort of some of our calculations in terms of figuring out right-sizing our boards. We typically assume that academic editors will handle somewhere between 6 and 8 papers a year. And that's sort of what we base some of our recruitment numbers on. Moving on to sort of definitely an idealized peer review timeline, but this is sort of the expectation and what the reminder system in editorial manager is set to basically this cadence. Again, calling out that this will vary by field, this will vary by ability to find peer reviewers, which again is just not a trivial task at all. But ideally, we want to have quick decisions where possible to provide a good author service, and this is sort of our idealized timeline. One thing again is just if you are expected to handle the manuscript to final publication, and there is sort of sometimes, if there are questions about the manuscript after publication, you might be called on to sort of address questions, comments, things. If someone has a formal comment on the paper, you'll typically be involved in the peer review of that as well. You'd also be involved in the peer review of revisions. Ideally, the section editor will be inviting you to handle papers at R1 and R2 that you handled at original submission as well, to keep that consistent. So when you do receive one of these invitations and you're trying to figure out whether or not you're a good fit for the paper, these are some sort of criteria that you can use to make sure or to confirm whether or not you think you should take the assignment on. Obviously, the first is the scope and publication criteria. Is it in line with the journal sort of expectations, the journal scope? For Comp Bio, for example, does this provide new biological insights, or does it have the potential to provide new biological insights? So sort of using your best judgment on the scope and the publication criteria. Is it biological enough? Is it too technical? That sort of thing. Using your own subject area expertise. You are experts, you got experts in the field, so contextualizing whether or not you think this paper is going to be enjoyed by the readers, is going to be cited, again, with selective journals. So typically that means citations, has a good chance of being cited. And determining whether or not you think you should send it out for peer review is also based on whether or not you think reviewers will be interested in reviewing it. And so just a quick look at the guide for sort of the decision matrix. And there will be, these link out to the journal information scopes, so you can compare sort of the fit of a paper to the scopes. But Scope criteria, peer review reject, these are more script criteria. Reject without review, sort of, conclusions run supported, methodologically unsound, just kind of icky in that way. And then sort of in other circumstances, figure out if it should go to external peer review. But yeah, won't go through all of these, but there's a nice little decision tree here for you to get through. And you can always, one thing I haven't touched on, which is sort of another function of editorial manager, you guys might be familiar with the discussions function. That is how the journal office will contact you about questions, follow-up concerns, that kind of stuff. But you can also always use it to open a conversation with another academic editor or the section editor. So, you're like, I really don't know if this is on the cusp of glory and an excellent breakthrough, but there's just no science like it, or this is something that's absolutely off in its own field, doing its own thing that we should have no interest in. You can always open a discussion with another editor and say, hey, this is, between the two of us, we should have a pretty good understanding of how this paper fits. Or you can reach out to the section editor and say, hey, why did you send this paper to me? It looks absolutely crazy. So feel free to always involve other people in decisions. I always find that it's nicer to sort of make decisions by committee, to know that you're sort of doing that with support of your colleagues versus doing it as an island. So don't be afraid to do that when you need to. So moving on to sort of what is going to be the meat of a lot of the work for you guys is finding and securing reviewers. So all accepted manuscripts must have external reviews outside, besides yourself, and all suitable reviewers must have expertise in the subject matter and methodology, and be, not in the naughty step in terms of things like retractions, publication ethics questions, that sort of stuff, making sure we're all above board as possible. The securing of reviewers is, of course, again, I'll say it, not difficult, but there are various sort of strategies that you can go through and to find pro tips, that kind of stuff that we can go into to help find peer reviewers as needed. And the one thing I will call out is, again, most of the journal systems are set up to be to operate with 3 peer reviewers, but we do fairly frequently move ahead with the decision. Section editors can move ahead with decisions with 2 reviews where they're concordant or fairly concordant. So, a minor revision and a major revision, but the major revision isn't that scathing, we can move ahead with the minor revision kind of decision as needed. Try to avoid burnout and overuse of resources, precious reviewer resources where possible. You are also to say you are welcome to provide peer reviews yourself. However, if you do that, you must declare that you have written the peer review. You must identify yourself as the peer reviewer. And we typically do encourage you to seek external peer reviews where possible, but you are welcome to do peer review yourself if you're really interested in the paper and you think it would be a good fit for your research. So of course, editorial managers are sourced and found in reviews are sourced and found in Editorial Manager. There's massive reviewer pools that you can browse, but we typically advise that you kind of start your search outside of Editorial Manager. And if the Zoom bar goes away, I'll click into just sort of the quick guide of finding, securing, and reviewers, and some of the tips and tricks associated. Suitable reviewers, this is sort of explaining to what a suitable reviewer checklist is. So, have they published enough work in this space to be an expert on it? Are they sort of active in this space? Are they at a level of a degree that they've demonstrated mastery over this? All these sort of things. How to avoid competing interests, things to look for COIs, that kind of stuff. But when it comes to researchers and trying to find your reviewers, your friends and colleagues are always going to be your best bet. They know you, they know your work. They are more likely to answer your emails, and we'll always sort of encourage folks to reach out to your personal networks first. A lot of sort of the hope we have for the editorial board is that by doing so, you're helping leverage your network and grow our community by involving new people who might not otherwise be involved in the journal, either as reviewers, authors, so on and so on. Moving on from there, if there's people whose work you're familiar with but don't know personally, it's always nice to sort of get those folks involved, and a sort of separate email outside of the system always goes a long way. Hey, Dr. Zhao, I think you just do really interesting work in mice models, and we've got a paper that I think would be really interesting for you. Do you mind taking a look at it? That always goes a nice long way. And pending that is not giving you any joy or any luck, we encourage you to sort of use the various databases at your disposal. I know many of you are probably very familiar with using PubMed to sort of drawing out keywords from the article's abstract or from the keyword selections, putting them to PubMed, figuring out who might be good reviewers based on that, similar to Google Scholar, Web of Science. In using these tools and recognizing that artificial intelligence is becoming very popular in all walks of life, PLOS does have a policy around artificial intelligence use for peer review. And we sort of the golden rule is please do not copy and paste any part of the manuscript into a language model. That is against the terms of our submission and the privacy of the submission. But rather, you can take the keywords or sort of draw words terms from the abstract and put them into a model and say, hey, ChatGPT, can you suggest reviewers working in this space based on these keywords in these regions, whatever that might be. But please do not copy any part of the manuscript directly into a language model. That is a violation of the submission terms. But feel free to play around with that. And of course, if you do use AI in your peer review, please write, I have used AI. So just declare that I've used this in this way, using keywords to find suggested reviewers. That's always helpful in staying above board. Sort of some additional tips here. Also tend to find that if you can access the core of early career researchers, they tend to have more free time and more interest in getting experience in the field, versus asking senior lab leader who's probably going to fob it off on one of their grad students anyway. And we always encourage co-reviewing as a way for folks to get experience. So if someone wants to do a peer review with their student, by all means, it's always good to get new people involved. And there's also a dimensions video here where I sit awkwardly and show off this wonderful tool about how basically a bibliometrics tool that is a nice way to sort of search for potential reviewers if you're stuck. So a lot to go through there, but super helpful stuff and very, very important to sort of the day-to-day operations of the role. So now you have your peer reviews in, and you're trying to figure out what to do with the peer reviews and how to sort of adjudicate them. And adjudicating the reviews is the key component of your role. So there will be you receive feedback in a structured form. Basically, did this adhere to PLOS policies? Yes. Do you think this manuscript is of novel interest? Yes, no. Are there any conflicts of interest you've identified in this manuscript that weren't declared? Yes, no. So it'll come through in a sort of structured way like that. And please note that please do not reviews should not be edited when they come to you. But if you have a review that you think is inappropriate, please do flag that to us in the journal office or the pub ethics team. But please do not edit the reviews yourself if you think that they need to be written better. And the most important thing is just making sure that the section editor is clear on what the key takeaway should be. I, as the academic editor, think that this paper should go to minor revisions for these 3 reasons, and that these are the most important parts of the papers that need to be addressed or revised up. So being very clear on what the ideal takeaway is always super helpful, and using that to adjudicate the decision with reasons of sort of the reviewers have provided you is very helpful. Again, sort of another thing to look for here is making sure that the reviewers are being unbiased and they're not suggesting review stacking citations. Sometimes people do suggest their own work and it's a great fit. That's great. And there's a time and place for that. But if that is being done excessively, that is a very serious publication ethics problem. And we would encourage you and expect you to reach out to us to let us know that you think this has been happening, and we'll take a look in. There are 4 major decisions in the journals: reject, accept, minor revisions, major revisions, and there's the guides here will sort of break down what the difference between those decisions are and why to determine when to use one versus the other. And just take a quick look at what these look like. Yeah, so more resources. I think these link out to the specific guides and FAQs. Just to as you might know this by now, but we take publication ethics very seriously here at PLOS. And so we have a guide nicely prepared for if you think you've run into a publication ethics question or a problem, feel free to go through this. And if you're still stuck, or if you just want to come to us first, feel free to email the JDM or pubethics@plos.org. We'll make sure it gets to the right person. Lovely. All right. So this is just a sort of roundup of all the resources currently available for you, broken down by journal. Sort of consistent by journal, but different where they need to be. So they might look kind of similar if you're working across different PLOS journals. And then, of course, at the bottom here, we have the journal contacts. These go to the journal offices. These are monitored pretty much all days. And so you should expect a response basically within a business day, as long as it's not a holiday or something. So do always feel free to get in touch with them. If you have technical questions, editorial manager is not always the kindest or cleanest system. I promise you're not crazy. Just email the journal office, they'll sort it out. Any of your questions about sort of editorial board training management, that kind of stuff, the editorial board support Dina, who you know intimately by now, will see that at some point, or one of her wonderful colleagues will see that at some point. So I have absolutely blitzed through a ton of information, and hopefully some of it stuck. Hopefully it was useful, but I will open to the, oh, unless there's anything I missed dramatically, Dina, please do jump in. But other than that, yeah, I'd just love to see questions, comments, worldviews. Dina, did I miss anything obvious or cool?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
A couple of one actually. The first one is okay. I've seen we have a lot of materials to learn about the journal policy, but I think desk reception is kind of you know quite important responsibility because you don't look at the paper as a reviewer actually. So I wonder whether there's some example seminars things to better understand the policy of the journal with respect to desk rejection, like understanding the aim of the journal, better understanding which kind of direction it takes. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Just to be sure that I'm not rejecting a paper because I think it's not enough for my journal for PLOS, but instead it is.
Sure, yeah, yeah. That'd be interesting, actually. This is a thing that so for the computational biology folks, we are planning on in this spring, excuse me, doing sort of a master class on scope, how to make these decisions,
Mhm.
what is biological enough, what is theoretical enough, that kind of stuff. And admittedly, this will be somewhat of a moving target based on which journal. As sort of a couple of kind of general truisms about this is really, most of these journals, we really want to be pretty free use with the desk rejects because we find that it just saves resources so much further down the line. Again, you guys, you have teaching responsibilities, you have kids, families, friends that you have to look after. So, you don't need papers that aren't going to have a good chance of being published in your inboxes. It's no good for anyone. So we do sort of encourage people to be pretty happy with the desk rejection decisions. The other thing that sometimes is helpful, and by all means, like this is something that we do, and happy to do more of, is sort of data sharing for some level setting. So I've had some conversations with the section editors before and sent these out to the section editors, particularly around desk rejection. I'm happy to share this with the larger board too, around sort of here's what the journal average desk rejection rate looks like. Here's what it looks like by section. That's not to say that your section is desk rejecting too much or too little, but sort of just to help you level set of like, this is kind of where we are. Um, from my own experience for digital health comp bio, the desk rejection rate is about 30%, averaged out, it's about 30%. And again, we do encourage every PLOS does not work to any sort of we have to publish X number of papers. So if I accept two, I have to reject two, that kind of thing. But we do sort of sometimes provide those numbers as just a sort of baseline of like, oh yeah, like roughly I've accepted, 7 papers, roughly I've rejected three, that kind of thing. Um, but really, we run a fairly decentralized peer review system in that way, and that's why we do really empower the academic editors to be um, experts in this way and feel free to, issue a desk reject decision if a section editor invites them to handle a paper, because burning out reviewers with work that is not going to get published doesn't really help anyone at all. Um, so really like look for quality of review scope. The other nice thing about if there's a scope issue, we always have plus one. So if you say, this paper is definitely methodologically sound, but just scope, I'm really unsure on the fence of this one. Like you can always feel free to reject that and send that to plus one because it's, it will take any sort of scoped work. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, that's helpful. The second question is that I'm already receiving a lot of requests, which I would like to go over all the papers, but it's kind of difficult if you receive like tens emails per week. So I wonder whether there is a way to limit the requests per week or per day in order to ensure a proper review of all the papers.
For sure. Admittedly, there's kind of one of a couple of things that might be happening there. The first one is just you have expertise that is, very, very in vogue right now. And so we always do appreciate the feedback that if you're saying like Joe, I've gotten 50 invitations this week, like, geez, that probably tells us we need more folks with Aldo's expertise to sort of go and recruit for that editorial board. because the way that we look at the editorial boards, it doesn't necessarily have the granularity of this. We have all of the expertise needs covered in a given section. We have sort of a general sense of, this, we have enough people with enough general sense of expertise. But so if you feel like you're getting a ton of invitations, that feedback to us as journal leads is always really helpful. So we know to go sort of target and recruit people specifically in that area to try and get you support. I will also say that editorial manager sends a lot of emails, and this is a thing that we work on continuously, is how can we streamline this? So this year, for example, we have launched a thing that basically like is a weekly, we've cut daily reminder emails for stuff and basically made it like a weekly reminder wrap-up email. So there are definitely a lot of emails that come out of the system. We are doing our best to sort of like limit those where possible. But if it is that you're just being invited all the time, don't feel bad about rejecting them. Just please reject them quickly and feel free to get in contact with us so that, we can sort of help you find support, make sure you're not getting bugged with too many invitations.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I guess I was a little confused um, about reviewing papers myself, right? And so this was something you said we could do, but I've heard from PLOS Genetics that that's pretty discouraged, right?
It's something you can do. It is discouraged. It varies a little bit by journal to journal. Some editors, editor-in-chief, have sort of personal preference about this that we try to uphold through being the journal leads. But from our perspective, it doesn't, as long as you are confident that you are the perfect or the correct person, there's no such thing as a perfect reviewer, the correct person to be the reviewer, that's completely fine as long as you sign as long as you've signed the review. That's really the key for us, is making sure that the author knows that the person handling the manuscript has also conducted a review as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Because there's a certain amount of time just going through the manuscripts and deciding if they should be sent out. So,
for sure. Yeah.
yeah. And if it's in my wheelhouse, it seems like wouldn't be that much more to submit a review on it.
Yeah. We just sort of try to give the option for folks who might feel less comfortable doing that, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I would add to that is if it looks like the manuscript is going to ultimately be accepted, you can't be the sole reviewer on that paper. You need to get additional reviewers from the community to provide input as well. Reject decisions don't have a minimum number of required reviews, but if you're going to go on and eventually issue and accept, there needs to be additional contributions in the review process.
Okay. Thank you.
The other thing, just to add some context, because I always find this is helpful, I think just generally publishing should always do a better job of providing information to folks whose lives revolve around publishing research works. For context, I've been doing this for about 10 years now. And when I started, the average number of invitations to person to accept a peer review was about 3 to 5. So you invite 3 to 5 people, one person will accept a peer review or to do that peer review. Post-COVID, it's about 6 to 9 now, more like 7 to 9. So it's we have seen on our side and at a publisher level that it has gotten harder to do peer reviews. So Jeffrey, to your point, that like if you have one really good peer review secured and it's been waiting 2 weeks and I just can't get the other person to do it, but this is definitely something I could lend some comments on, put some expertise to. That's always a really helpful place just to sort of like keep things moving while also maintaining ethical standards, all that good stuff.
Yeah, I have one manuscript right now that's gone through 11 declines for reviewers.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of a good manuscript, but at the same time, how do you deal with that? It takes forever when you're allowing people to respond. This has been out for 2 months now, and I feel really bad for the authors.
Yeah. It's sort of a universal problem, sadly. That turnaround times are just getting longer.
Yeah, and the experts in the field just don't want to review.
Yeah. There is something to be said to your point of, you feel this is a good manuscript. There are times as well, and this is very much within you guys, the editors, judgment to make this call. But, if you've invited 50 people to a manuscript and no one's agreed to peer review, is there a point where like perhaps the community isn't that interested in this manuscript? And that's sort of the judgment between knowing that, oh gosh, the conference of the year is here, so just everyone's away, so that's why they're not accepting peer reviews, versus like, gosh, there just isn't that much interest in perhaps the novelty of this paper. So that is a judgment call you're welcome to make. I also recognize that as a decision is where we really like to sort of make sure you're not making that decision on your own. Because if a paper's been sitting for 3 months and then someone gets a reject decision, like you as the editor having to write that letter is it's unfortunate, right? Like that sucks. That's not like a nice feeling to have that you've put all this time into it. But you are welcome to reject a paper with a note saying like, dear Dr. Smith, really sorry for sort of the delay here. We've with all of our best efforts, we've tried to secure peer reviewers, and we weren't able to do it. So because of that, like we think it's more fair to return it to you so that you can sort of have a better luck else. Hopefully you have better luck elsewhere and preserve your time that way.
Yeah, and I think that's a good message to send to the authors simply because, they usually suggest reviewers, right? And those
Yeah.
are the first ones that I pick anyway, and if those
Yeah.
people are declining to review, then they should know maybe not to pick them again. So
Yeah. There's also something to be said for how good people are picking reviewers.
yeah.
Picking the head of NASA is not a good suggested reviewer.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
I have a related question on that note. What is the right balance to have between the reviewers that the authors suggest and people you pick separate from that? Because I often wonder if it's not a good idea to draw just from the people that the authors are suggesting, and I would always try and find somebody who's outside that group. But what is the right balance there?
Jennifer, you have an excellent intuition, which is ideally you have one peer review that is from the suggested reviewers list, and then, one or two that are sourced by you. Just for sort of extra avoidance of conflicts of interest, we typically prefer that you would only use one suggested reviewer. There's also something to be said for the fifth suggested reviewer is the person you would invite anyway. But you might find that person in your own search anyway, and that's kind of fine. But yeah, we do sort of encourage you to only use one where possible.
Right. I had a situation where like the people most relevant in the field were all suggested by the authors. And so that made it a little bit challenging. So I ended up having to use two of them. One of them I would have asked anyway, but I kind of wondered what the right balance was and if that's inappropriate to take multiple suggested reviewers if they're the right people, because often they are the right people.
For sure. And like sort of to that point, like you can tell when someone has put the time into figuring out if they're a good reviewer versus just turned out the first name that showed up in Google Scholar or something. So yeah, sometimes it'll be inevitable that you have to use all of them, but ideally not. Yeah. These are really good questions, guys. Oh, sorry, Aldo.
Sorry, just a last question. Can we invite PhD students that we take the responsibility they are very expert in the field, so maybe they may be more available to and willing to review some paper?
Yeah, definitely. We really encourage that. If you believe that they're at the level that is, they have the expertise to do it, we really actually encourage that for sure. And we encourage them to sign the review as well. We would love them to get credit for the review that they're doing.
Okay, I have a related question as well. So, in one paper I handled, I invited the reviewers the author suggested, and they all turned down and suggested one reviewer, which is actually the one the author.
We had to have one technical difficulty.
It's always how it works, isn't it? Right when you need to speak, that's when your internet.
On tenterhooks.
I know. If anyone else has a question, we can wait for him to log back in.
One thing, while we have this commercial break, I will share that is helpful from the journal lead perspective. So all of the journal homepages, go to PLOS Contrast Biology. If you have ideas for new colleagues that you'd like to suggest, you can either just email them to us, but all of the journal homepages will have this banner here, interested in joining the PLOS board. And so if you know anyone, PhD students, postdocs, folks that you have met as you've traveled the world and kissed babies and shook hands, you can direct them to this, and it's a little quick questionnaire. What section is the best fit for you, so on, so on, so on, so on. So just nice, easy way to get folks involved in the journal. Cool. How, John? Have you returned?
Yeah, maybe. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
This is Kai Wang from University of Iowa. So I have a follow-up question that is to invite a PhD student for a reviewer. So I want a confirmation. Is that okay? Acceptable practice, or it needs like a senior reviewer to work together with the PhD student?
Ideally, if it's sort of at your judgment of what level they are. Again, we have the recommended guidelines that if they're an advanced PhD student, typically we recommend typically 5+ papers written in the field. So if they're sort of a late term PhD and they've done sort of 5 papers in this field, that's fine. That's sort of like in those cases, I would refer to the sort of decision guideline of, do you think this person is a good reviewer, that went over in the presentation. But typically, like advanced PhDs, once they've published 4 or 5 papers, are a good fit, have enough sort of industry knowledge to provide a good peer review. Sure.
Okay. So talking about those 5 publications, the first author and the middle author, so does that make a difference?
For editors, that is a thing we look at. For reviewers, I don't think we look at position of authorship for that. But for example, just to sort of peel back the curtain a little bit, when we do recruitment for editors, we do look for, I think it's a minimum of 3 or 5 first authorships, that kind of stuff, in addition to sort of other papers they've written. So, yeah.
Okay,
cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. Did we get Hao Zhang back? Or I think he's still swimming through the ether. Cool. If that's all good, I might follow up with Hao Zhang separately and just see what his question was, and then if it's if it's broadly interesting, I'll circulate response, all that good stuff, to the team. But yeah, I think if all is good, Dina, should we bang the gavel and adjourn the meeting?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Everyone's